What if Issei got Ophis pregnant, and had kids? The weight of something infinite. The thing about living with a god, or something close enough to one that the distinction barely mattered, was that she never made any noise. Issei Hayate had grown up in a house with two parents who announced themselves constantly. His father's heavy footsteps on the stairs, his mother's voice carrying through walls as she narrated her cooking to no one in particular, the specific percussion of domesticity that told a person, even with their eyes closed, that they were not alone. He had inherited this trait. He was, in the language of every teacher who had ever tried and failed to corral him, a loud person. He filled rooms. Ophis did not fill rooms. She occupied them, which was a different thing entirely. She could be standing 3 feet away and you would have no idea until you turned around and found her watching you with those flat violet eyes still as a hell breath, her small hands folded in front of her, utterly patient in the way that things which have existed since before the formation of stars are patient with the small dramas of shorter-lived creatures. It had been unnerving at first. Issei was not ashamed to admit that. Now, almost a year after the chaos that had rearranged the supernatural world and left the infinite dragon god living more or less permanently in the Hayate household's smallest upstairs bedroom, he had grown so accustomed to her silent presence that her absence was the thing that unsettled him. When she was visiting Vala's team or had been called to one of the increasingly frequent interfaction meetings that her new status required, the house felt actively wrong to him, a missing tooth his tongue kept finding. He was thinking about this, and about several other things he would have been embarrassed to have anyone examine too closely, when Akino Himejima set a plate of grilled meat in front of him, and said, with the precision of someone who had spent months learning exactly how to be infuriating, "She's watching you again." The dinner was the weekly gathering of Rias Gremory's peerage at the Hayate household, which had become the de facto social hub of their extended supernatural network, partly because Issei's mother was a genuinely extraordinary cook, and partly because the Hayate home had, through some combination of Issei's fundamental nature and the various events that had taken place within its walls, accumulated a peculiar warmth that even beings of enormous power seemed to find difficult to resist. The living room had been rearranged to accommodate 8 people around 2 pushed-together tables. Rias sat at the head of the larger one, already halfway through her meal and in the middle of a conversation with Kiba about raiding game strategies that Issei was only half listening to. Akino occupied the seat to his left, using her hostess role as a vehicle for commentary she knew he couldn't publicly respond to. Kaneko was across from him, eating with focused efficiency, her cat ears barely visible under her hair. Asia was beside Kaneko, telling Zenobia something about herb cultivation that Zenobia was following with the intense, slightly lost expression she wore when she encountered information she couldn't frame in terms of combat. Irina sat beside Zenobia, following the herb conversation with genuine interest, and Ophus was at the far end of the second table, with a plate in front of her that she had eaten 3 bites of, which was approximately 3 bites more than she usually managed before forgetting she was supposed to be eating. She was watching him. Issei, who had been in the middle of cutting a piece of beef, did not look up. He was aware, with the specific hyperacute social awareness of a person who has been observed by something ageless and inhuman for the better part of several months, that she had shifted her gaze to him approximately 4 minutes ago, and had not moved it since. He had learned not to react immediately. Immediate reaction, he had discovered through painful trial and error, tended to cause Ophis to simply stop whatever interesting thing she was doing and return to the statue-like stillness she wore as a default. It was better to let her continue and then, carefully, slowly, find the right angle of approach. He said to Akino, which was not an agreement or a disagreement but a conversational holding pattern. Akino, who was entirely too perceptive and too entertained by this situation, smiled into her tea. He caught Ophis's eye about 8 minutes later, between the end of Rias's rating game analysis and the beginning of Kaneko's detailed and somewhat chilling assessment of why the analysis was incomplete. He looked up and she was already looking back, which meant he had miscalculated the timing slightly, and had been observed for the 4 seconds before he looked rather than catching her in the act. It was a small strategic defeat. He raised an eyebrow. She did not raise anything. Her expression was, as always, a pristine blankness, not hostile, not vacant, simply uninscribed, like a page that had been waiting longer than anyone could remember for the right word. He tilted his head toward the hallway. The smallest possible signal. She stood up, picked up her plate with a propriety she had clearly copied from Asia, and walked toward the kitchen without particular urgency. He gave it 30 seconds, then said, "I'm going to get more rice to no one specifically," and followed. The kitchen, when he got there, smelled of his mother's cooking and was lit by the soft, warm light she always left on over the stove. Ophis had set her plate on the counter and was standing in the middle of the room, not doing anything, which was normal for her. Issei leaned against the doorframe and looked at her. "You've been watching me," he said. It was not an accusation. He kept his voice at the easy, unhurried pitch he had learned was most likely to produce anything resembling a genuine response from her. "Yes," Ophis said. She said it with the same flat certainty with which she said most things, as though language were a slightly inefficient translation of something she already knew completely, and she was only rendering it into a form he could use. "Anything in particular you were looking for?" Issei asked. She considered this for a moment. He had learned to value these pauses. In the first few months of her residence in the Hayate house, he had made the mistake of trying to fill them, launching into conversation before she'd finished whatever internal process she was running, and the results had been comprehensively unsuccessful. Now he simply waited. "You were talking to your mother earlier," Ophis said. "On the phone. She called to check in," Issei said. "She does that when she's traveling." "You laughed 4 times, Ophis said. The third time was different from the others. Issei thought back. His mother had said something about his father getting his shoes stuck in a drainage grate outside their hotel, and he had laughed, really laughed, the kind that surprised him, because he could picture it perfectly, the precise embarrassed expression his father would have made while trying to maintain dignity. That one was real, he said. The others were just social. Polite. "You know." "I don't know," Ophis said, with no particular distress about this fact. "That's why I was watching. To learn the difference." He looked at her. She looked back. In the warm kitchen light, she looked. He searched for the word and landed on the same one he always did, which he was aware made no logical sense. Young. Not in any way that reflected her actual age, which was a number so large it approached meaninglessness, but in the sense of something that had not yet been weathered, had not been shaped by the accumulation of ordinary damage. Like the very oldest trees sometimes looked, enormous and timeless, and somehow also untouched. "Why does the difference matter to you?" he asked. Another pause. "Longer this time. I have been here for 11 months, Ophis said, with the precision of someone reporting a measurement. When I came, I intended to remain until I had recovered sufficient power and determined a next course of action. I had not planned to remain as long as I have." "Yeah, I noticed," Issei said. Not complaining. "I have not departed," she continued, as though he hadn't spoken, "because I find that the conditions of this place produce something in me that I do not have a word for. I have existed for a very long time. I have moved between all dimensions. I have been present for the formation and collapse of numerous worlds. In all of that time, I have wanted only one thing, and I pursued it singularly." She paused. "That has changed." Issei was quiet. He had the specific stillness of someone who understands that they are in the presence of a moment that it would be catastrophically easy to ruin with the wrong word. "Now I want," she stopped. Reconsidered. "I observe this house. I observe the people in it. I observe you, particularly. And I want," another stop. Her brow very slightly furrowed. "I don't have the word." "To stay?" Issei said softly. She met his eyes. "Perhaps. What would that mean? Staying. What does it involve?" He talked for a while. He talked the way he always did when something mattered to him, which was the way he did most things, without particular strategy, following the thread of what felt true. He talked about the house and what it had been before all of this, a normal house with normal people and a routinely embarrassing son, and what it was now, a place that had hosted angels and devils and dragons and was still, somehow, a home in the only sense that word had ever meant to him. A place where people chose to come back. He talked about his parents, who had accepted the supernatural world with a readiness that he suspected said something profound about them, and about the way his mother had set a place for Ophis at the table from the very beginning without being asked, and without making anything of it. He talked about Rias and the others, about what the peerage meant to him, not the power structure, not the devil politics, but the specific weight of people who had decided, mutually, to belong to each other's lives. And then, because he had been building to it without quite knowing it, he talked about marriage. He was not, in retrospect, entirely sure how this happened. One moment he was explaining what it meant to stay somewhere by choice rather than by necessity, and the next he was explaining that the highest form of that choosing, the most deliberate and declared version of it, was what humans called marriage. A promise made in front of everyone that you intended to remain, to continue choosing, to keep coming back to a specific person out of all the people and places and possibilities in the world. Ophis listened without interrupting. She listened, Issei had noticed long ago, the way mountains might listen if they had the capacity, absolutely, taking in everything, giving back nothing until she was ready. And you have not done this, she said, when he reached an uncertain stop. Made this promise. No, Issei said. Not yet. Why not? He laughed, which surprised him. That's a complicated question. Most true questions are, Ophis said, with what might, in a being with a wider range of expression, have been dry humor. I guess, he scratched the back of his head. It has to be the right person. It's not just about feeling. It's about who you are when you're around them. Whether they make you more yourself or less. Whether the version of you that exists when they're in the room is the version you want to be. Ophis was quiet for a moment. Issei, she said. Yeah? The third laugh. The real one. When you speak with your mother. Her violet eyes, which had not moved from his face, held something in them that he could not name. You make that sound sometimes when you are speaking to me. The kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere outside, someone in the living room said something and a small burst of laughter answered it, muffled through the wall. Ophis, Issei said very carefully. I would like to understand marriage, she said. From the inside. I believe that is the accurate phrase. He stared at her. She looked back. Patient. Unreadable. Entirely serious, in the way that things which have existed since before the formation of stars are serious about the small things they have decided to care about. Are you? He stopped. Is that? Are you asking me to? I am asking you to explain it further, Ophis said. But I suspect the most effective method of explanation would be for you to. She turned this over for a moment. Asked me? The kitchen was still quiet. Issei Hayabu, Red Dragon Emperor, high-class devil, possessor of the boosted gear, veteran of wars that had reshaped the supernatural world, stood in his mother's kitchen at 9:15 on a Thursday night, and felt his entire understanding of his life rearrange itself around a new center of gravity. Ophis, he said, and his voice came out steadier than he expected. Do you want to? He stopped. Tried again. Will you marry me? She considered this for precisely 3 seconds. Yes, Ophis said. That is what I want. The sound that erupted from the living room 8 seconds later, when the door swung open and Akino Himejima, who had apparently been standing approximately 2 feet from the kitchen doorway for an undetermined portion of the preceding conversation, screamed I knew it at a volume that rattled the kitchen window, was loud enough to bring the neighbors to their front doors. Rias Gremory, when informed, sat down very suddenly on the couch and put both hands over her mouth. Kiba said, with genuine warmth, Congratulations, and shook Issei's hand. Kaneko looked at Ophis for a long moment and then said, very quietly, Good, and went back to eating. Asia burst into tears of happiness, which set Irina off, which prompted Zenobia to look at both of them with an expression of profound helplessness before patting them carefully on the head. And Ophis stood in the middle of the living room while all of this happened around her, the noise and warmth and motion of people who had chosen each other, and for perhaps the first time in a very, very long existence, she did not want to be somewhere else. Somewhere in the sacred gear on Issei's arm, Drake sat in the red gem quiet of the boosted gear and said nothing at all for a very long time. Then, slowly, he said, Partner? Yeah? Issei said, in the 1-second pocket of relative quiet between Akino's second exclamation and Rias recovering enough to begin producing questions. I have survived being bound to humans for centuries, Drake said. I have survived Welsh dragon legends, sacred gear experiments, and you, specifically. But I want it noted, for the record, that nothing in any of that prepared me for this. That makes 2 of us, Issei said. 3, said a very small, very flat voice from the other side of the room. Issei looked at Ophis. She had not smiled. She did not smile, Or at least she had not yet, though he had begun to think that she was capable of it, and simply hadn't found the right reason. But there was something in her eyes, those flat violet eyes that had been watching him for 11 months and learning the difference between the kinds of laughter, that hadn't been there before. Something that looked, in the warm disheveled light of the Hayata living room, like a rival. Like a thing that had been moving for a very long time had finally, in this noisy overcrowded room full of people who were delighted for them, found the place it meant to be. The first person Rias called was her brother. This was, in retrospect, a mistake, not because Sir's Lucifer was unhelpful, but because he laughed for so long and with such complete abandon that she had to hold the phone away from her ear for approximately 40 seconds while he composed himself, and by the time she had already decided that she was handling this entirely on her own and hung up on him. The second person she called was Azazel. This was a worse mistake. I knew it, Azazel said before she had finished her first sentence. His voice had the specific quality of a man who had been waiting for this phone call for months and had, in fact, placed informal bets on the timeline. I had November in the pool. What's the date today? I'm close, right? Tell me I'm close. There is no pool, Rias said. There is absolutely a pool. Barraquil has December. Michael, and I cannot stress enough how much I respect this man. Michael had next March because he said, and I quote, "The boy is earnest but not swift. He's going to be devastated." How did it happen? No, wait, don't tell me yet. Let me get Shemhazai on the line. He'll want to hear this in real time. Rias hung up on him too. She sat on the edge of her bed in the Hayata guest room. She had been staying over, as she often did on dinner nights, and now deeply regretted not having the option to simply walk home, and looked at the ceiling and thought carefully about her situation. Issei Hayatu, her bishop, her dear and catastrophically unpredictable friend, the person she had brought back from the dead and handed a piece of her soul and watched grow into someone extraordinary, had just proposed marriage to the infinite dragon god, and the infinite dragon god had said yes. Rias was a gremry. She was a high-class devil of immense pedigree, political sophistication, and trained composure. She had faced Phoenix Clan heirs, old Satan loyalists, Chaos Brigade operatives, and the administrative nightmare of running a raiding game peerage while simultaneously attending high school. She put a pillow over her face and made a sound into it that she would never, under any circumstances, admit to having made. Then she sat up, smoothed her hair, and began making a list. The list, by morning, had 47 items on it. Number 1 was inform Sirzex properly. Do not let him find out from Azazel first, too late, damage control. Number 2 was contact rating game commission spousal status implications for peerage ranking. Number 3 was find out if there is any existing legal precedent for devil/dragon god unions. She already knew the answer was no, but she needed documentation of the no so that when she walked into whatever bureaucratic nightmare awaited her, she could demonstrate that she had done her research. Number 9 was talk to Issei. Number 10 was talk to Ophus, which she had starred, underlined, and then stared at for a long time because she was genuinely uncertain how one talked to Ophus about something like this. Ophus did not do conversations in the conventional sense. She did information exchange. She did observation. She occasionally did something that resembled opinions, if you were patient and paid close attention and were willing to accept that the opinion might be delivered in 12 words or fewer with no surrounding context. Rias had enormous respect for Ophus. She also found her profoundly difficult to read, which was uncomfortable for someone who prided herself on reading people. She went downstairs at 7 in the morning and found Ophus already in the kitchen, standing at the counter with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking, watching the backyard through the window. This was, apparently, a thing Ophus did in the early morning. Rias had not known this before. She was now thinking about all the things she didn't know about Ophus and finding the list considerably longer than she'd like. Good morning, Rias said, with careful normality. Good morning, Ophus said, without turning from the window. Rias made herself coffee. She stood beside Ophus at the counter. Outside, the Hayata backyard was gray and still in the early light, the garden that Issei's mother kept looking slightly silver with dew. Are you happy? Rias asked. She hadn't planned to ask it that directly, but there it was. A pause. Then, I don't know if that's the right word, Ophis said. I have been happy before. It is usually brief. A state that passes. Another pause. This is different. It doesn't feel like it will pass. Rias looked at her profile. The absolute stillness of her, the strange, ageless quality she carried even in a kitchen at 7 in the morning holding a cooling cup of tea. He loves you, Rias said. I want you to know that. Not the idea of you, not what you represent, you specifically. He's been different this year. Since you've been here. Different how? Rias thought about it honestly. Quieter, she said finally. In a good way, like someone who has found a place to put something heavy down. Ophis was quiet for a long moment. I know, she said. And then, which was not something Rias had expected, so have I, Issei came downstairs at 7:45, still in the process of becoming vertical, his hair doing several things simultaneously, wearing the ancient Co-Academy gym shirt he slept in and a pair of shorts that had seen better decades. He stopped in the kitchen doorway when he found both Rias and Ophis standing at the counter, looked between them, and had a brief but visible internal experience. Morning, he said, with the caution of a man who is not yet sure what emotional register the room is operating in. Good morning, Rias said. She had decided, somewhere between the first coffee and the second, that she was going to be calm and supportive and handle this with the grace befitting a gremry. She had also decided, somewhere between the second coffee and this moment, that she was absolutely going to make his life administratively difficult for the foreseeable future, as a completely separate matter. Both things could be true. Ophis turned from the window and looked at Issei. Something happened to his face when he looked back at her. It was a small thing, a slight softening, a shift in the quality of his attention, the way a compass needle swings when it finds north. Rias, who had loved Issei in her own complicated way and had spent a long time understanding what that love was and what it wasn't, watched this and felt something settle in her chest. Not loss. Resolution. We need to talk, Rias said, about approximately 47 things. Can I eat breakfast first? No. She gave him until he'd had coffee. She was not, despite current evidence, unreasonable. The 47 things turned out to be, at their core, several large categories of problem. The first was legal, which was the most immediately pressing. The second was political, which was the most complex. The third was personal, which was the one nobody wanted to talk about first but which was, quietly, the one that mattered most. They sat at the kitchen table, Issei, Rias, Ophis in her usual chair at the corner, and Rias laid it out with the methodical clarity that she brought to all problems she had decided to solve rather than despair over. There is no existing framework, she said, for a union between a high-class devil and the infinite dragon god. The underworld's legal system has provisions for interfaction marriages. Devil and angel, devil and human, devil and various supernatural beings. But these provisions assume that both parties exist within the established supernatural hierarchy. Ophis does not exist within the established supernatural hierarchy. Ophis is, legally speaking, in a category that contains only Ophis. Can't we just do the ceremony and call it done? Issei asked. Rias looked at him. Right, he said. 47 things. The Rating Game Commission will need to issue a ruling on your peerage status, because your household composition directly affects your rating classification. The 3-faction alliance will need to be formally notified because any permanent alliance between a faction member and the infinite dragon god has geopolitical implications. Heaven will need to be notified because heaven notifies itself of everything and it is better to control how they find out. The dragon factions, she paused. I've actually not been able to determine who represents the dragon factions in official capacity, which is itself a problem. Great Red, technically, Issei said. Does Great Red attend meetings? Great Red does not attend anything. Great Red flies around the dimensional gap eating reality. Then we have a representation problem. Rias made a note. I'm also going to need to speak with Lord Gremry, because while you are not technically a member of my family, you are a member of my peerage, and the Gremry clan's relationship with this union will be the subject of enormous political attention regardless of whether we choose to make it one. What does your family think? Issei asked. Rias smiled. which was the particular smile she used when she was processing something too large for immediate emotional access. My brother laughed for 40 seconds. My father is going to need several days. My mother will be fine, she likes you. She paused. My father also likes you, which is why this will take him several days rather than several weeks. Xerxes. Lucifer convened the emergency session of the four great Satans 4 days after the announcement, which was, given the logistics of organizing the four most powerful beings in the underworld for an unscheduled meeting, remarkably fast. This speed was itself a commentary on the perceived urgency of the situation, which was in turn a commentary on how completely the supernatural world had been caught flat-footed by Issei and Ophus's decision. The session took place in the primary council chamber of the underworld's administrative complex, a room built to handle the most significant matters of infernal governance, its architecture scaled to beings of enormous power and designed to communicate, through sheer imposing size, the weight of the decisions made within it. Xerxes sat at the head of the council table looking entirely too cheerful for the occasion. Seraphal Leviathan was vibrating with the energy of someone who had been waiting for something interesting to happen for a long time and had been well rewarded. Ajuka Beelzebub had already covered one side of his notepad with mathematical notations that appeared to be calculations related to the metaphysical stability implications of the union, which suggested he had moved through surprise and into fascinated problem-solving with characteristic speed. Falbium Asmodeus had fallen asleep before the session formally opened and showed no signs of remedying this. So, Xerxes said, folding his hands on the table with the pleasant air of a man who has decided that history is being made and he is fortunate to be present for it. The boosted gear wielder has proposed marriage to Ophus. Ophus has agreed, Seraphal clarified, with the precision of someone who considered this the more remarkable development. The question before us, Xerxes continued, is how the underworld formally recognizes and responds to this union. What followed was 4 hours of the most complex supernatural legal debate that had occurred in the underworld's administrative chambers in several centuries, covering questions that included but were not limited to whether Ophus, as a being who technically predated the current cosmological order, was subject to any of the 3 factions' jurisdictions at all, whether a marriage between a registered devil and a being outside the hierarchy created any form of treaty obligation, whether the children of such a union, a possibility that the legal team had included in their briefing documents in a section labeled Contingent Biological Hypotheticals in the optimistic hope that this framing made it seem less alarming, would inherit devil status, dragon status, both, either, or something requiring entirely new classification, and whether the Rating Game Commission's spousal bonus provisions applied when the spouse in question was a primordial entity of effectively limitless power, which would, if applied literally, make Issei's household rating essentially incalculable. Ajuka Beelzebub solved 3 of these questions before lunch using a mathematical framework he constructed during the session. The other questions required a subcommittee. I want to go on record, Seraphal said, at the end of the session, as finding this wonderful. Noted, Xerxes said. I also want to go on record as saying that Issei is extremely brave. Also noted. And that if anyone in the underworld makes this difficult for them out of political resentment rather than genuine procedural concern, I will personally, Seraphal. I'm just saying. You've said it. It's noted, thank you. Heaven's response arrived in the form of a formally worded document delivered by a junior representative who had clearly drawn the short straw and could not quite maintain eye contact for the duration of the delivery. The document expressed Heaven's awareness of the announced union, Heaven's ongoing commitment to the 3-faction peace treaty, Heaven's respectful reminder that the terms of the treaty pertained to devils and fallen angels and did not explicitly address primordial dragon gods, and Heaven's wish for the parties involved to experience, and this phrasing was clearly the result of significant internal deliberation, harmonious circumstances in their domestic arrangements. Michael had signed it himself. At the bottom, below his formal signature, in slightly different ink that suggested it had been added after the fact, was written, "Please tell Hayato-kun that I admire his courage." Issei, when this was relayed to him, was extremely touched. Irina cried. This had become a recurring motif. Azazel materialized in the Hayato living room on the 5th day without being invited, which was consistent with his general approach to most things. Right, he said, dropping into the armchair that had somehow become his when he visited, with the air of a man who had been thinking intensively and had arrived at conclusions. I've been doing research. You've been doing research, Issei repeated. Historical research. Cross-referencing every recorded instance of unions between beings of significantly different metaphysical classifications. You know how many precedents there are? He held up 2 fingers. 2. One was in Norse mythology and ended catastrophically for unrelated reasons. One was in a dimension we don't have a name for and produced offspring who are currently classified as natural disasters and 4 separate cosmological systems. He paused. The research was not encouraging. Thanks, Azazel, Issei said. However, Azazel continued, raising a finger, I have also been doing the other kind of research. The kind where you look at what makes the difference between the ones that work and the ones that don't. He leaned forward. You know what makes the difference? I feel like you're going to tell me. Whether both parties actually want it, Azazel said, with a simplicity that was surprisingly untheatrical for him. Not need. Not find useful. Not feel bound by obligation or circumstance. Want. He looked between Issei and Ophis, who was sitting on the couch with her cup of tea, watching Azazel with the expression she used for mildly interesting phenomena. Do you want this? Yes, Issei said. Ophis? Yes, Ophis said. Azazel sat back. Then you're already doing better than both historical precedents. He picked up the television remote. Are we watching something? I've been told there's a cooking competition show that Kaneko finds compelling and I want to understand why. It was Kaneko who talked to Ophis, though she did it in the way Kaneko did most things, obliquely, practically, and without making it into more of an occasion than it needed to be. It happened 6 days after the announcement, in the Hayate kitchen, late afternoon, while Issei was at a meeting with Rias and the others about the logistics of the formal recognition process. Kaneko was eating a piece of cake. Ophis was standing at the window again. This was, apparently, just what Ophis did in kitchens. You're worried, Kaneko said, without preamble. Ophis turned from the window. I don't worry. You're doing the thing where you're very still and your eyes are somewhere else, Kaneko said. She ate a bite of cake. That's what worry looks like on you. A pause. Then, because Ophis, whatever else she was, did not lie, there's something I don't understand. What? Ophis turned back to the window. I understand the decision. I understand what I want, and what he wants, and what the union means in terms that I can define. She was quiet for a moment. But there are things about it I cannot define. When he laughs, the Real laugh. When he is in a room and I am aware of it before I see him. When I am somewhere else and the somewhere else is not enough. She paused. I don't know what those things are. I don't know if they are sufficient. I don't know if I can. She stopped. Be enough? Kaneko said. Silence. You've existed since before the world was the world, Kaneko said. You've been the infinite dragon god and the thing every faction was afraid of and the power that everyone wanted to use. And now you're worried you're not enough for one person. Don't worry, Ophis said for the second time, with slightly less conviction. Kaneko finished her cake. She was quiet for long enough that someone else might have thought she'd moved on. Then she said, still looking at her plate, I was afraid too. When I started to let people in. When I decided to stay instead of leaving. She glanced up at Ophis briefly. The things you're describing. The awareness of him before you see him. The places that are not enough when he's not in them. She paused. Those are enough. Those are exactly enough. Ophis looked at her. Kaneko picked up her plate, rinsed it in the sink, and set it in the drying rack with the focused efficiency she brought to everything. Also, she said over her shoulder, he's been making that Real laugh a lot more since you got here. Just so you know. She left the kitchen. Ophis stood at the window for a while longer. The backyard was silver and still. A bird landed on the fence post, looked at nothing in particular, and flew away. After a while, she picked up her tea, which had gone cold, and sat down at the kitchen table. And then she did something she had not done in a very, very long time, in a kitchen in a house in a small city in a world that was smaller than any of the dimensions she had moved through, among people who were briefer than almost anything she had known. She let herself feel it. All of it. The warmth and the uncertainty and the nameless thing that had been building in her for 11 months and had not, as she had told Rias, felt like it was going to pass. She sat with it. It was large. It was also, she discovered, not frightening. She stayed there until Issei came home, his voice in the hallway before she saw him, already talking to someone on his phone, laughing at something, not the social laugh, the real one, and the kitchen was immediately a different kind of place that he poked his head in, saw her, raised a hand. She raised a hand back. 5 minutes, he mouthed, pointing at the phone. She nodded. She had time. She had, it turned out, decided to have all the time he needed. The formal recognition came through on the 14th day after the announcement, in the form of a document from the Underworld's legal office that was 17 pages long, and had been drafted by Ajuka Beelzebub's legal team, reviewed by 3 separate committees, and ultimately signed by all 4 great Satans, a representative of heaven, Azazel on behalf of the fallen, and a space that had been labeled Dragon Faction Representative, and eventually signed by Tannen, who had been tracked down with some difficulty, and had signed with the tolerant air of someone completing a form so that the humans, well, the near-humans, would feel better about things. The document legally recognized the Union, established a new classification category for the household in the rating game system, classification, sui generis, do not attempt standard assessment, acknowledged that any offspring would require individual metaphysical evaluation, and included a 4-page appendix that Ajuka had titled Notes on the Theoretical Implications of a Lineage Combining Boosted Gear Succession and Primordial Dragon Essence, which Rias read twice and then put down and didn't pick up again. Issei read the whole thing at the kitchen table while Ophus sat across from him, watching. 17 pages, he said, when he finished. Yes, Ophus said. For us to get married. Yes. He looked at her. She looked back, and then he started laughing, the real kind, the third laugh kind, the one that surprised him, because 17 pages and 4 committees and a dragon who had to be tracked down to sign a document, and at the center of all of it was Ophus in her chair watching him with those serious violet eyes, and he was the luckiest person in any dimension that had ever existed. Okay, he said, when he could talk again, setting the document down. Okay. So we're doing this. We are doing this, Ophus confirmed. Are you? He searched her face. Are you good? With everything? She considered this with the precision she brought to all true questions. Kaneko says the things I feel are exactly enough, she said. Kaneko's very smart. Yes. Ophus looked at him steadily. I am good, with everything. He reached across the table. She looked at his hand for a moment. This was still new, the casual offering of contact, the easy physical vocabulary of belonging to someone, and then placed her hand in his. Her fingers were cool and still. His were warm. Next steps the ceremony, Issei said. I have been thinking about the vows, Ophus said. Something in his expression went very careful and very soft at once. Yeah? I have been researching what vows typically contain. I find the traditional forms insufficient. So you're writing your own? Yes. He looked at her for a long moment. Outside the kitchen window, the Hayata backyard was turning toward evening, the light going gold and long through the garden his mother kept. I can't wait, Issei said quietly, and he meant it in every sense the phrase could carry, that he was eager, that he was impatient, that waiting for whatever Ophus would say when she stood across from him and said the things she had decided to say, in words she had decided were sufficient, felt like the longest remaining distance between here and the life he wanted. Ophus, who had waited since before the formation of stars, understood waiting from the inside. She understood the weight of it, and the shape of it, and what it meant when it finally, after all that time, turned into arrival. Not much longer, she said. The kitchen was warm. His hand was in hers. Somewhere in the house, Rias was adding things to a list, and Azazel was watching a cooking competition. Chapter 3. The Ceremony at the Edge of the World. Rias Gremory had planned many things in her life. She had planned raiding game strategies down to the smallest contingency. She had planned the careful political navigation of her engagement to Riser Phoenix, and the more careful navigation of escaping it. She had planned the structure of her peerage with the attention to detail of someone who understood that the people around you were not pieces on a board but the actual substance of your life, and that choosing them well was the most important thing you would ever do. She had not planned a wedding between a high-class devil and the infinite dragon god. Nobody had planned that. Nobody had thought to. She made herself responsible for it anyway, because somebody had to, and because Issei would have planned something earnest and slightly chaotic, and because Ophis, when asked what she wanted the ceremony to look like, had said I don't have a preference for visual details with such complete sincerity that Rias had understood immediately that this was not indifference but trust, a rare and specific thing from a being who did not distribute it widely, and had felt the weight of it settle on her like a mantle. She planned it the way she did everything that mattered, completely. The location had been Ophis's one contribution to the logistics. I will make a space, she said, on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks before the ceremony date, in the way she said most things, simply, as a statement of fact. The way one might say I will make tea or I will open the window. It won't be here. Not another dimension that already exists. A new one. Rias had looked at her. You can do that. Yes. How large? Ophis had considered this. How large does it need to be? The guest list, by that point, had grown to a number that Rias found alarming and Issei found delightful and Ophis found neither alarming nor delightful but simply accepted as a feature of being attached to people who were themselves attached to many other people. Every member of the Gremry peerage. Every significant ally from the three-faction conflict, Azazel, who had made clear that missing this would be something he refused to do. Tannen, who had been asked as a representative of the dragon community, and who had accepted with gruff dignity. Vala Lucifer, who had not been invited in the traditional sense but had communicated through Biko that he intended to attend and that Issei should consider this a gesture of respect rather than presumption. Issei's parents, who had been told the complete truth about the supernatural world approximately 8 months prior, and had responded with a combination of faith, love, and the practical resourcefulness of people who have decided that reality is whatever is actually happening, and what was actually happening was that their son had found someone, large enough for perhaps 200, Rias said, with room for a ceremony space, a gathering area, and whatever the reception requires. Ophis nodded as though this were no more significant than any other small request. Then she went into the backyard after dinner, stood very still for approximately 90 seconds, and created an entire dimension. Rias, watching through the kitchen window, took a slow breath. She just, Asia had said, appearing at her elbow, eyes wide. Yes, Rias said. She made a yes. Just like that? Rias turned back to her planning documents. Yes, she said for the third time, with the tone of someone who is determined not to find anything too remarkable because if she starts finding things remarkable she will never stop. Now. Flowers. I need your opinion on flowers. The dimension Ophis had made was not like other dimensions. Every dimension Rias had visited had its own character. The underworld's vast structured grandeur, heaven's architectural perfection, the churning chaos of the dimensional gap. Each had been built, in one sense or another, by accumulated history, layers of presence, and event and meaning deposited over time until the place itself carried weight. Ophis's dimension had none of that history. It was new. It had been made 3 weeks ago out of nothing, and it felt like the inside of a hell breath, clean and still and charged with a potential that hadn't yet been shaped into anything. Rias shaped it. She spent 2 weeks going in and out of the space with a rotating team of helpers, each bringing their particular skills to the transformation. The dimension was not large by supernatural standards. It was a single vast room, essentially, with a ceiling that opened into something that was not quite sky but had the quality of one, deep violet blue, shot through with threads of silver light that moved slowly like currents in still water, lit from no visible source. The ceremony space was at the center, a long aisle of white stone, flanked by arrangements that Asia had sourced with tremendous care. Flowers that did not exist in the human world but had equivalents in the underworld's deeper forests, blooms that held light inside them rather than reflecting it, so that the aisle was lined with a soft interior glow. At the far end, a simple arch, black wood and white stone, wound through with the same luminous flowers. Aquino had managed the practical architecture, the seating, the lighting that supplemented the flowers, the gathering space to the side with its tables and the food that Issei's mother had, with the pragmatic love that defined her, insisted on contributing to, despite the venue being a pocket dimension accessible only through a temporary gate in the Hayato backyard. She's making the katsu, Issei had told Rias, with the expression of someone who finds this completely reasonable. She says if people are going to travel to another dimension for a wedding they should eat properly. Rias had added coordinate reception menu with Mrs. Hayato to her list, and had not questioned it further. The dress had been the hardest part. Not hard in the logistical sense. The design had come to Rias quickly and completely. She had a sense, built from careful observation of Ophus over the past year, of what would and would not work. Ophus did not do ornamentation. She did not do complexity. She had chosen the form of a small, dark-haired girl, and she wore it with the absolute ownership of something that has decided its shape and does not revisit the decision. Hard because Rias had to convince Ophus to wear it. I don't require a ceremonial garment, Ophus said, when Rias raised the subject for the first time. You don't require one, Rias agreed. I'm asking you to consider one anyway. Why? Rias had thought carefully about this. Because Ophus responded to reasoning and not to appeals to tradition or social convention, and the wrong reasoning would close the conversation immediately. Because the ceremony is a moment, she said. A specific, bounded, unrepeatable moment. And moments can be marked. The marking doesn't change what they are, but it acknowledges that they matter. She paused. You matter to the people who will be there. The garment is a way of mattering back. Ophus had been quiet for long enough that Rias began composing her graceful acceptance of a no. Black, Ophus said. Yes, Rias said immediately. Simple. Yes. Nothing that restricts movement. Of course. Another pause. Show me, Ophus said. The dress was black. It was extraordinarily simple. A clean column of deep matte fabric that fell from shoulder to floor without complication, with sleeves that reached the wrist and a collar that sat at the base of the throat. It had no decoration except for a narrow trim at the cuffs and hem in a silver so dark it was barely visible except in direct light, which had been Rias's one concession to flourish, kept small enough that Ophus had looked at it for a long moment and then not objected. Her hair was down. This had also required a conversation, shorter than the dress conversation but with the same structure, Rias explaining the reasoning, Ophus evaluating it, Ophus deciding. It fell straight and dark around her face, and with the dress and in the dimension's particular light, she looked like something that had stepped out of a story that predated the concept of stories. Issei, when he saw her, stopped walking. He was at the other end of the aisle. Kiba was beside him, serving as his best man with the quiet dignity he brought to everything, wearing a suit that managed to look both impeccable and effortless. Issei was in the white hakama that his mother had helped him choose, formal in a way he rarely was, and it suited him in the specific way that certain people are suited by the clothes that mark occasions, not because they look different but because they look, for once, entirely like themselves in their best register. He stopped walking when he saw Ophus appear at the far end of the aisle, and for a moment, he simply looked. And something in his face did the thing that faces do when they encounter something they have no adequate response to and simply open toward it. Kiba put a hand briefly on his shoulder. Breathe, he said quietly. Issei breathed. The 200 guests had come from every corner of the supernatural world, and they had arranged themselves in the seats along the aisle with the complex social geometry of a gathering that contains multiple factions, numerous historical conflicts, and a significant number of beings who were accustomed to being the most powerful entity in any given room and were here collectively discovering that this was not that room. Sirzex Lucifer sat in the front row on the left, his silver hair catching the dimension's ambient light, wearing an expression of genuine warmth that his position rarely afforded him space to show. Beside him, Lady Gremory, who had met Issei twice before today and had told Rias last week, with the directness of a woman who had not survived underworld politics by being oblique, that she approved of him because he looked at Rias like a person and not like a piece, and any man who could do that had good instincts. Lord Gremory had come to his approval more slowly and had arrived at it, as Rias had predicted, fully. He sat beside his wife with the contained dignity of a man who had accepted that the world was larger than his plans for it, and had decided to be present for it anyway. Azazel was in the third row, which he had arrived at 40 minutes early to secure, on the grounds that he intended to observe everything and wanted a good angle. He had brought a notebook. He was absolutely writing things down. Tannen occupied a space at the edge of the seating area where he had been allocated extra room with the practical acknowledgement that he was very large. He sat with the crossed arms, slightly suspicious expression he wore most of the time, which Issei had long ago identified as his version of moved. Vala was near the back, arms folded, expression neutral, eyes tracking everything. He had worn, Rias noticed with some surprise, what appeared to be his best coat. This was, from Valley, essentially equivalent to a standing ovation. Issei's parents were in the front row on the right. His mother was already crying, with the serene inevitability of someone who knew this was coming and had made no effort to prepare for it because preparation would have been beside the point. His father had his arm around her and was looking at his son at the end of the aisle with an expression that Issei, mercifully, could not see clearly from the distance, because it would have undone him entirely before the ceremony even began. The officiant was a problem that had required its own sublist. Who officiated a ceremony between a high-class devil and the infinite dragon god? Not a representative of heaven, for obvious reasons of optics. Not a devil official, because the union was explicitly interfactional. Not Azazel, who had offered and been turned down on the grounds that he would editorialize. They had landed, through a process of elimination that had taken 4 days, on a retired human priest who had learned of the supernatural world's existence through his friendship with Issei's family and had responded, at age 72, with the equanimity of someone who had decided a long time ago that the universe was bigger than his understanding of it, and had found this a source of comfort rather than alarm. He was a small man with white hair and the specific gentleness of people who have spent their lives in proximity to important moments in other people's lives, and he stood at the arch at the end of the aisle with a quietness that the space around him seemed to recognize and accommodate. He did not find Ophis frightening. She had asked him, the day before, with the directness that was her fundamental mode, whether he found her frightening. He had looked at her for a moment, and then said, "I find you very serious about something that deserves seriousness. That's not frightening." "That's right." Ophis had nodded once, and that had been that. The ceremony began without music. Ophis had not wanted music, and when asked what she wanted instead, she had said silence, and Rias had realized that in a space Ophis had made, silence would be an active thing, a presence, and she had been correct. When the moment came and the 200 guests had settled and Ophis appeared at the end of the aisle, the silence of the dimension was not empty but full, charged with the specific quality of attention when something true is about to happen. Ophis walked the aisle alone, which had been her decision. There was no one to walk beside her. She was, in the most literal possible sense, singular. She walked with the absolute stillness of her movement, unhurried, her dark dress moving slightly with each step, and the light from the flowers caught in her hair, and 200 beings from every faction that the supernatural world contained watched her cross the space between where she was and where Issei was, and nobody made a sound. Issei watched her come. Later, when Kiba asked him what he had been thinking in that moment, he said, "I wasn't thinking. I was just watching. Counting the steps. Thinking that I didn't want her to stop walking because I knew that when she stopped walking the moment would change into something else, and I wasn't ready for the moment to change yet." He paused, and then she stopped, and the thing it changed into was better. She stopped in front of him. She looked up at him. He was a full head taller than her, which had always been, if he was honest, something he found quietly remarkable, this small, ancient, absolute thing choosing to stand in front of him as something that could be looked down at and looked up at in return. "Hi," he said very quietly. "Hello," she said, with the same quietness, and something that was almost the ghost of something warmer. The traditional portion of the ceremony was brief, because they had agreed it should be, an acknowledgement of intention, a declaration of presence, a formal witness. The retired priest moved through it with the unhurried precision of someone who understood that words at their weight need space around them. Then he said, "The parties have each prepared their own vows, which they will now speak." Issei went first. He had written them himself, without help, after several failed drafts that he had not shown anyone. He had eventually stopped trying to be eloquent. He was not, he had decided, an eloquent person, and the vows were not for elegance, they were for truth, and had simply written what was true. "I don't know how to say this the right way," he said, looking at her, "so I'm just going to say it the way I know." When you showed up, I didn't understand you. I still don't understand you completely. And I think I won't ever completely. And I've decided that's not a problem. I don't need to understand everything about you. I just need to know what I know, which is that this house is different when you're in it, and I'm different when you're in it, and the version of me that exists when you're nearby is the version I want to be. He paused. You told me once that you existed for a long time wanting only one thing. I think about that a lot. I think about you moving through all that time, all those dimensions, all that distance, and ending up here. In my mother's house. Eating 3 bites of food and watching me laugh on the phone. He stopped. His voice was doing the thing voices do when something is too large for the mechanisms of speaking to carry cleanly. I can't give you infinity back. I can't give you what you had, but I can give you this house and these people and every real laugh I've got for the rest of my life, and I want to, and I will, and that's the promise. In the 3rd row, Azazel wrote something in his notebook and then looked at the ceiling. Ophis looked at Issei for a moment after he had finished. Then she looked at the gathered faces, at Rias, who had her hands clasped tightly in her lap, at Asia, who had gone entirely past tears into some quieter state beyond them, at Kaneko, who was looking at the floor with the careful attention of someone managing their expression with effort, at Aquino, who for once was not smiling but simply present, simply watching, at Serzex and his parents and Tannen and all the others, 200 beings from across the world and the worlds beyond it. She looked back at Issei. I prepared these words over several weeks, she said. Her voice was even, her tone unchanged from the tone she used to discuss everything, which in this context was not flatness but depth, a voice that had been shaped over ages into something that did not need inflection to carry weight. I have read what humans have written about this. I found most of it insufficient. I wrote several versions and removed them. This is what remained. She did not look away from him. I have existed since before the formation of this world, she said. I have moved through every dimension that exists. I have been present for the beginning and the collapse of more things than can be named, and in all of that time, I pursued only silence. The silence of the dimensional gap. The silence of a self that does not require anything from outside itself to be complete. A pause. I was wrong about the silence. I discovered this here, in your house, in your kitchen, watching you laugh on the phone with your mother. I discovered that the silence I had wanted was not absence. It was this, the silence inside a place where everything necessary is present, and nothing is missing. Another pause, and then, with the precision of someone who has chosen each word from a much larger set and discarded everything that was not exact, you are not what I was looking for. You are what I did not know to look for. I am here because here is the first place that I have been that I did not want to leave. And you are the reason that is true, and I will stay, not because I have nowhere else to go. Because there is nowhere else I want to be. That is what I have to say. That is the promise. The silence of the dimension after she finished was the fullest silence Rias had ever heard. Then Issei made a sound that was not quite words, and it was the real laugh and something else combined, and he was crying, openly and entirely without self-consciousness, in the way that he did everything that was large enough to require it. In the 3rd row, Azazel closed his notebook. Tannen uncrossed his arms. In the front row, Issei's mother put both hands over her heart. Drake, inside the sacred gear, said nothing. He would later describe this period as one in which he was occupied with other matters. This was not true. The truth was considerably simpler and considerably less consistent with his self-image as an ancient Welsh dragon of dignity and terror, and he intended to take it to his grave. They exchanged rings, simple ones, chosen by Issei and approved by Ophus with the efficiency she brought to decisions she had already internally made. His was dark metal. Hers was white, a shade that caught the dimension's light and held it. When the priest said the final words and the moment arrived, Issei looked at Ophus, and Ophus looked at him, and the 200 beings in attendance collectively held what breath they had. He kissed her gently. She allowed it, and then she did something that nobody in attendance had ever seen her do before, that the people who had lived with her for a year had wondered about and waited for, and not quite expected today. She smiled. It was small. It was brief. It was not the performance of an expression but the real thing, arrived at unexpectedly from the inside, the kind of smile that happens to a face rather than being made by one. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds before her face settled back into its customary stillness. But it had been there. Every person in that dimension had seen it. Asia started crying again. Irina joined her immediately. Zenobia, with the expression of someone who has run out of strategies for managing other people's emotions, simply put her arms around both of them. Rias pressed 2 fingers to her lips and breathed out slowly through her nose. Azazel opened his notebook again and wrote 1 word. Serzex reached over and took his wife's hand. Kaneko looked up from the floor, looked at Ophis, and nodded once, small and certain, the nod of someone whose assessment has been confirmed. The reception was exactly what the Haida household had always been at its best. Too many people, too much food, and a warmth that accumulated rather than dissipated as the evening went on. Issei's mother had made the katsu, and also 3 other dishes, and had coordinated with Akino on the desserts, and the tables in the gathering space were full in a way that suggested not abundance but genuine provision, food made by someone who understood that feeding people was an act of love and not a logistical exercise. Azazel cornered Issei near the food table at some point in the middle of the evening and said, with the directness that was his most genuine mode, "You know what you've done, right? Not politically, not in terms of power. I mean what you've actually done. Gotten married?" Issei said. "You've given her a reason," Azazel said. "That's not nothing. That's possibly the most significant thing. She existed for longer than I can really conceptualize without a reason beyond the one she'd chosen, and that reason kept her in isolation for most of that time, and now she has." He gestured vaguely at the room. "All of this. Reasons plural. It changes what she is." He paused. "I'm not saying this to be heavy. I'm saying it because I want you to know that what you've done matters beyond what you can probably see right now." Issei was quiet for a moment. "She changed me first," he said. Azazel looked at him. Then he laughed, quietly, which was different from his usual laugh. "Yeah," he said. "That's how the good ones work." Late in the evening, after the food had been largely addressed and the conversations had shifted into the slower register of a gathering winding toward its end, Issei found Ophis standing at the edge of the gathering space, looking at the dimension she had made. It was darker now, the silver threads in the ceiling had deepened, and the flowers along the aisles still glowed softly in the middle distance. "Good?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "Yes," she said. "Your vows." He stopped. Started again. "Those were the most. I removed a great deal," she said. "The version before the final version was considerably longer. I'd like to read it someday," he said. "If you kept it." She looked at him sideways. "I kept it." He smiled. Outside the gathered warmth of the reception, the dimension was quiet in the way it had been built to be, clean and new and not yet shaped by history. They were shaping it right now, he thought. First event in a new space. First weight on a new scale. "Ready to go home?" he asked. She considered the word home in the way she considered all words, fully, attending to its exact shape. "Yes," she said. And then, because she had found in recent weeks that she could, and because the moment was large enough to say it in, "I am glad we did this." He looked at her. The small face, the violet eyes, the black dress that Rias had argued for 3 weeks. The ghost of the smile that had undone 200 supernatural beings in a pocket dimension on a Tuesday. "Me too," he said. "More than I can say." She nodded once. Then she took his hand, which she had been doing more often in the past weeks, still with the slight deliberateness of someone learning a language, each gesture chosen rather than automatic, which made each gesture true. They stood at the edge of her dimension together, while behind them the last of the reception wound slowly toward its end and the people who had come from every corner of the supernatural world drank and talked, and ate katsu and, in several cases, cried in ways they were not fully acknowledging, and the night moved over everything with the unhurried patience of time passing through a moment that would be remembered. 3 days later, a man whose name would not be known until Chapter 7 received a report from his operatives and read it in silence. He read it twice. Then he set it down, and sat for a long time in a room that had no windows. The infinite dragon god had aligned herself with a bloodline. She had made vows. She wore a ring. She had smiled, apparently, in front of witnesses. He sat with this information for a long time. Then he began making plans of his own. Chapter 4. What Infinity Leaves Behind. The first thing Issei learned about being married to Ophus was that she did not sleep. He had known this, in an abstract sense, the way he knew other facts about her that existed in his mind as information without weight, that she had existed before the current cosmological order, that she had once commanded the entirety of the Cow's brigade, that she could unmake dimensions with the same ease with which he might open a window. These were things he knew. They sat in the part of his understanding that held large, unmanageable truths and had learned to hold them without tipping over. But knowing that Ophus did not sleep and discovering, on the first night of their marriage, that Ophus did not sleep were two different experiences entirely. He woke at 2 in the morning to find the bed beside him empty and the room quiet, and the particular quality of alone that is different from solitude, not absence but presence relocated. He lay there for a moment in the dark, listening. The house was still. Then he got up. Because he was Issei Hayadu and he had never once in his life been able to identify a situation where the correct response was to stay in bed, and he was not going to start now. He found her in the backyard. She was standing on the small strip of lawn between his mother's garden and the back fence, looking up. The sky above Ko was doing what the sky above Ko always did at 2 in the morning, which was exist in that specific shade of urban dark, not quite black, the city's light pushing up from below to turn it a dull orange-gray. Ophus was looking at it with the expression she wore when she was paying close attention to something that other people might not have noticed was worth attention. "Hey," Issei said from the back door. He was in his gym shirt and shorts. The night air was cold in the way that late autumn nights are cold, immediate, specific, reminding you that the warmth you'd been carrying was yours and not the world's. "You woke up," Ophus said without turning. "Your side of the bed was empty." He came out onto the small concrete step. Do you do this? At night? "I exist at night," she said, as though this were the more precise phrasing, which it was. "I am here. I am also elsewhere, in the way that I am usually in several places at once. But this part of me," she touched 2 fingers briefly to her own sternum, which was as close as she came to indicating a self distinct from her full scope. "This part is here." Issei sat down on the step. The cold concrete through the thin fabric of his shorts was bracing in a way that made him feel more awake. He looked up at the same dull orange sky she was looking at. "Do you mind?" he asked. "That I came out." A pause. "No," she said. "I don't mind. Do you want company, or do you want me to go back in?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she came and sat beside him on the step, close enough that their arms touched. Her arm was cool through his sleeve. She looked up at the sky from this lower angle. "Company," she said. They sat there for a while. The neighborhood was doing its 3 in the morning things. A distant car, a dog somewhere several streets over conducting a private grievance with the universe, the hum of the city that never fully stopped. Issei could see his breath faintly in the cold air. Ophus's breath, he noticed, did not show the same way. She was cooler than him, calibrated differently, her body heat different from a human body's heat. "I don't know what the right thing to do is," he said after a while. "In the mornings? When I wake up and you're not there. Do I come find you? Do I give you the space?" She considered this. "I don't need space," she said. "Space is not what I'm doing. I'm simply not sleeping." "Right. But I also don't require company." She paused. "I find that I prefer it. When you come." That was not always true. It is true now. He looked at her profile. The small serious face, the dark hair loose around it, the way she held herself with the absolute stillness of something that has never had a reason to make itself smaller or more comfortable for the things around it. And beside him, on a concrete step in the cold, touching his arm. "I'll come find you," he said. "When I wake up and you're gone, I'll come find you." "All right," she said. They sat on the step until 4 in the morning, when the cold finally persuaded Issei's body that continuing to exist outside was a negotiable position, and he said, "I'm going in," and she came with him, and he went back to sleep, and she lay in the dark beside him not sleeping, which was a different thing from being alone. The second thing he learned was that she did not dream. This one took longer to discover, because it was embedded in a conversation that arrived sideways, the way conversations with Ophis often did, beginning as something else and becoming, through the specific gravity of her particular kind of honesty, something more exact. They were eating breakfast on a Saturday morning 3 weeks into the marriage, Issei eating. Ophus holding a cup of tea and occasionally taking a sip with the focused attention of someone completing a task, when he mentioned, idly, a dream he'd had the night before, something involving a raiding game that took place in a library, and Rias trying to give strategy instructions in a whisper that kept getting louder until it wasn't a whisper at all, and at some point Drake had been there in a physical form wearing a business suit, which even asleep Issei had found slightly on the nose. Ophis listened to this with the focus she brought to things she found genuinely interesting. What does dreaming feel like? She asked, when he finished. He opened his mouth to explain, and then paused. You've never. No. She turned the cup in her hands. I know what dreaming is. I have observed it in humans for a very long time. I understand the mechanism, but the experience of it. She paused in the particular way she paused when she was being precise about something she found difficult to be precise about. I don't have it. Is that? He stopped. He was aware that asking is that hard or do you miss it were questions that assumed a framework she might not have. Does it matter to you? That you don't have it? She thought about it honestly, in the way she thought about everything. No, she said. I don't know what I'm missing, so I can't miss it. I only know it's something you have that I don't, which is, another pause. That's a long list. Is it a problem? She looked at him. You have mortality, she said. You have a body that requires sleep and food and that will eventually stop. You have parents who are human and will grow old in human time. You have, she paused, a great many things that I don't have. I don't experience these as problems. I experience them as, she turned the cup again. He looked at her for a moment. That might be the nicest thing you've said to me, he said. I wasn't trying to be nice, she said. I was being accurate. Yeah, he said. I know. That's why it's the nicest thing. The third thing, and the largest, was that she did not know how to be idle. This was the one that required the most active negotiation, because it was the one that showed up most insistently, and in the most varied forms. Ophis had existed for eons with a singular purpose. And even after she had abandoned that purpose and attached herself to the Haida household, she had found other purposes to replace it: recovery of power, observation of the supernatural political situation, her involvement in the conflicts that had followed. She was always doing something, in the specific sense that she was always in a state of directed existence, pointed at an object, processing toward a goal. She did not know what to do in a house on a Sunday afternoon when Issei was napping and there was nowhere to be and nothing that needed to be pointed at. Issei discovered this when he came downstairs from his nap to find Ophis standing in the middle of the living room, not doing anything, in the specific way that was not her usual stillness. Her usual stillness was inhabited, occupied from the inside, a stillness with content. This was different. This was the stillness of something that does not know what to do with its hands. What's wrong? He asked immediately. Nothing is wrong, she said. You look like something's wrong. I don't know what to do, she said, with the flat candor that was her fundamental mode. You were asleep. There is nothing that needs doing. I have no task. Issei leaned against the doorframe and looked at her. Right, he said. Okay. So, have you ever just not done a task? Meditation is a form of purposeful non-task, she said. That's not what I mean. She waited. I mean, he pushed off the doorframe and came into the living room. I mean just being somewhere. Without an agenda. Letting the time pass without making something of it. He sat on the couch. Come sit down. She came and sat beside him, with the propriety she had learned from watching the others. Now what? She said. Nothing, he said. That's the point. She sat with nothing for approximately 45 seconds before she said, This is uncomfortable. I know. He reached over and turned the television on. Start smaller. Something to look at. You don't have to engage with it, it's just noise and light. Background. She looked at the television. A cooking competition was playing, the one Kuniko had apparently influenced Azazel to watch, involving a great deal of urgency about pastry. Ophis watched it with the expression she brought to all new phenomena, focused, evaluative, without prejudice. After a while, something in her posture changed. It was a small change, a slight settling, a fraction of the held quality relaxing. She did not lean back, exactly, but she became less precisely upright. This person, she said, indicating one of the contestants, is making a technical error. Yeah? Their temperature is wrong. The pastry will not set correctly. Issei looked at her. How do you know about pastry? I have observed a great deal of cooking over a long time, she said, as though this were obvious. Temperature is temperature. Do you want to learn? He asked. To cook? For real, not just observing? She considered this. Would it be useful? It would be something to do, he said. On Sunday afternoons? When I'm asleep and you don't have a task. She looked at the television, at the failing pastry, at the contestants' mounting distress. Yes, she said. I would like to learn. He taught her, across the following weeks, in the way he'd been taught, by doing it wrong several times first and paying attention to why. She learned with the complete attention she brought to everything, making notes that were not written down but existed somewhere in the vast organized archive of her, precise and permanently retained. She did not find cooking simple, she found it interesting, which was better. Temperature and timing and the specific alchemy of combining things in the right order to produce something that had not existed before. These were not so different, she told him once, from certain kinds of dimensional work, just at a smaller scale. Smaller, he said, looking up from the egg he was separating. Much smaller, she agreed, with the faint dryness that he had come to recognize as her version of humor. Right. He passed her the bowl. Fold this. Gently. Don't. She folded it with absolute precision. Okay, he said. You're better at this than me. I've been observing for longer, she said. Yeah, you keep saying that. He leaned on the counter. Does it ever? He stopped. Reconsidered the question. Is it strange? Having done all of that, all the observing, all the moving through dimensions, all the time, and then being here? Learning to fold eggs? She was quiet for a moment, focused on the bowl. It is not strange, she said. It is small. But small is not the same as lesser. She paused. I have found that the smallest things are often the ones with the most. She searched for the word. Wait, in the way that matters. He looked at her. Like what? He said. She glanced at him sideways, the bowl still in her hands. The third laugh, she said. He was quiet. Small, she said. But I've been watching for months. It's never been wrong. Everything that has weight, in the way I mean, has been small at first. She looked down at the bowl. This is well folded. Yeah, he said. It is. She taught him stillness in return, though she did not present it that way. It happened gradually, the way the largest changes happen, through accumulation rather than event, each instance small enough that he did not notice the pattern until it was already established. He found, after 2 months of marriage, that he could sit in the backyard at night for a long time without needing to fill the time with anything. He found that he could be in a room without moving through it. He found that silence, which had always felt to him like an absence waiting to be remedied, had started to feel like a thing with its own texture and content. He mentioned this to Kiba, who listened with the quiet attentiveness he brought to conversations that mattered. You're learning from her, Kiba said. She's learning from me too, Issei said. It goes both ways. That's what the good ones are, Kiba said, which was the second time in the space of several months that someone had said something almost exactly like this to Issei, and he had begun to think it was not a coincidence but a truth he was being given from multiple angles until he internalized it. The news came on an ordinary Thursday, ordinary in the specific sense that the Haida household's ordinary had become, which was to say, not ordinary by any external standard, but ordinary by theirs. Issei was home from a meeting about raiding game preparation. Ophus was in the kitchen, not cooking but observing the garden through the window in the way she did in the afternoons. His mother had called earlier. Drake had been uncharacteristically quiet all day, which Issei had noticed but attributed to the sacred gear's occasional periods of dignified silence. He came into the kitchen and stopped. Ophis was standing at the counter with her hands flat on the surface, and her eyes directed at a middle distance that had nothing to do with the kitchen, which was different from her usual window watching in a way he identified immediately as significant without being able to say why. Hey, he said. What's wrong? Nothing is wrong, she said, which was the same thing she had said in the living room months ago, and was equally not convincing. Ophis. She turned to look at him. Her expression was the careful blank it always was, but there was something beneath it, a quality of processing, of something very large being